That song, I was looking for a good song that was Woody Guthrie singing about not having a home, and he actually mentions Donald Trump, or Fred Trump in the song because you may remember if you don't have enough things to hate about Donald Trump, you can remember he was also or also is a racist landlord, and he and his father were sued by the for racial discrimination, and Woody Guthrie actually wrote about that. So anyway, don't have too much to say as far as intro remarks. Our treasurer is doing well. We have about $2,500. We're really not spending on anything and not really taking in any money, but we're taking in as people are joining, but that's about it. So anyway, um, that's pretty much. I don't have a lot to say, but it could go on and on. But I'll just pass it off to Joanna, who's going to talk about weaving.
Hey, everybody, welcome from me as well. Thank you so much for being with us on a Sunday evening, on a summer Sunday evening. It is kind of gray in the Bay Area. I don't know if everybody's in the Bay, but we're really grateful that you're spending your time with us. Um, I don't know if you've been feeling this way, but it's been really dark times in many ways. I know I have been feeling this way. I was just laying in bed because I wasn't feeling well, and I'm pregnant and going through a lot of things and changes in my body. And I opened my Instagram, and there were more photos of really terribly starving children in Gaza. And there's just no words for that kind of violence that the United States is complicit in and the Israeli government is committing. And how do we meet that level of darkness, right? How do we actually meet it within ourselves? And what's been helping me is thinking about how, even if everything is dark around us, that each one of us has this light, right? And sometimes you can't find it around you. You have to look within yourself and awaken it within yourself. So, whatever it is that helps you awaken your light, maybe it's meeting up with other folks, maybe it's music, maybe it's art, maybe it's organizing. I hope that you're able to do that, so we don't fall into the belief that the system really wants us to believe in, that we're powerless, because we're not. We're very, very strong together, and this is what this club is about: is trying to bring our power together to help transform our county, Alameda County, here in the Bay Area. And just as a little recap, our last session was about housing justice. We, as usual, created like a little reflection. Share my screen here to show y'all. Well, with some of our sticky notes from last time. For those of you who are here, you remember. If you weren't, here's a little overview. We talked about how we need homes for all, right? Where the speaker said that they're not against building and new development, but we still need homes for everybody, right? And how the question of displacement is not just about the physical displacement of people and the economic harms to people, but the spiritual and community displacement that people experience. That our homes are not just, we can't swap this place for another place, because here it is where I have my community. Here is where I have my roots. Here is where I have my connection to land. And in Western societies, a lot of that gets lost. And thanks to gentrification and displacement in various forms that's happening around the country, people are forced to leave their homes. We also talked about the need to distinguish between land as commodity and land as where we live and build community. And then there was a number of really important questions that were posed in that conversation that Kalima really beautifully helped lead. And it actually brings us to the topic for today's discussion that the Kalima will lead, and he will introduce our amazing speakers on tenants' rights and tenants' justice. I know many of us are tenants, and it's really helpful to know what are our rights, what can we do when we're being faced with abusive landlords or difficult conditions. I'll share very briefly the agenda for the rest of our time together is to hear from our two amazing speakers, two Leahs, Leah Goodrich and Leah Simon Weisberg. Thanks for being with us. Kalima will lead a fireside chat with them for about half hour. Then we're going to have some time for reflection and discussion that I'll help lead, so you all can chat and think about how we are applying the lessons learned to our work here in the Bay Area. Then Seema hopefully is going to lead a little portion about what do you want to hear from in terms of speakers going forward, right? The way we have kind of organized our meetings is with it. We have each meeting discussing a hot topic issue, something that's dear to our hearts, so that we can collectively learn and become better at organizing and more effective in our organizing. And the second portion of the meeting is a little bit of like, how are we taking those lessons? How are we doing? What are we doing as a club? So you all can speak and share more about your own work as well. Then Kalima is going to lead a quick kind of touch point around the thing that we're calling Leadership Council, because this Democratic Club is completely different than other Democratic clubs. So we want to have movement organizations represented at a leadership level, helping guide. And then we're going to close with some next steps and maybe do a little closing exercise if we have time for that. So before I pass it to Kalima, I just want to check in. I don't know if there are some new folks here who've never been with us. Maybe raise your hand if this is your first meeting of our joining our club, or give me an emoji of some kind. Okay, maybe it's not. So thanks y'all for, oh, hey Shane, good to meet you. Thanks for joining for the first time. And for everybody else, welcome back. Does anybody have any questions or concerns or needs? Okay, not seeing anything. So I'm going to pass it to you, Kalima, to take us to the next section.
Hey, Joanna, and I think this is like one of the first times that you publicly mentioned that you're pregnant, and so I think our entire community is just sending so much prayer and blessing and thoughts to you. You are giving birth in a community, and a community that loves and adores you, and so we all wanted to show up for you as much as possible. Everyone, please excuse me if I start coughing. I've had been struggling with walking pneumonia, and so it's pneumonia that's been going in and out, and so my lungs have been sort of rebuilding them. Sorry, rebuilding themselves, and so please excuse me, especially since I've got this microphone right up in my mouth. So the rent is still too damn high. Welcome to AC Pro Dems. Good evening. Tonight we have a special event. Well, every time we're meeting with you all, it's a special event. But you know, housing is on the front line of every struggle we face, especially as Democrats, as progressives, just anyone who cares about what's happening and can see outside their window, in their hallways, right across the street, in their homes themselves, what's happening. And what's happening is gross racial injustice, economic injustice, and a fight for human dignity in a system that's rigged against working class people. Rent is skyrocketing, displacement is accelerating, and too often tenants are left out of the political conversation, except when it's time to fund a campaign or pay for someone else's profits. But tonight is different. Tonight, we're putting tenants front and center. We're honored to be joined by two of the fiercest tenant rights champions in the country, both of whom have not only won policy fights, but have changed the very way we think about housing, equity, and power. I am going to see if one of them, Leah Goodrich, is on. If Leah is still not on, she's on the East Coast, so please excuse her. But just in case, Leah Simon Weisberg, I may have you speak first, and so as we wait for Leah, so we have Leah Simon Weisberg, a Bay Area powerhouse who needs no introduction in tenant circles, but is still going to get one anyway. Leah Simon Weisberg is the executive director of the California Center for Movement Legal Services. She has spent decades defending tenants from eviction, writing some of California's strongest rent control and just cause ordinances, representing Moms for Housing. Some of you are very familiar with Moms for Housing. That's how we got one of our wonderful council members in Oakland. The movement that ripped the mask off corporate landlords hoarding homes while people are sleeping in tents. Her work has spanned Richmond, Berkeley, Oakland, and I will say even Emeryville. She's also has advised me, and I'm very also also happy to have someone from Emeryville who has joined. This is the first time, and she's starting some tenant organizing in her building. So I just want to welcome her. I'm going to keep her anonymous, but just shout out to her. But her a lot of her focus has been what would tenant power look like if we actually won. And so she's just been an amazing brain trust for all of us, especially in California, who've needed someone to get an idea of what can actually work, what can actually get passed, like what can actually happen, not just our ideals, but in terms of policies. And I think that this is the conversation that we're going is what can we actually get done that can actually happen with people power. Both of our leaders actually tonight remind us that housing justice is it about charity? It's not about welfare. It's not about all of these things that are sort of attached to this work. It's about organizing. It's about law. It's about policy. And of course, it's about people power. So please stick around for Leah Goodridge when she comes on. But I just want to welcome Leah Simon Weisberg. Leah, is there anything you want to open up with?
Well, just, really want to thank everyone for inviting me, and just really impressed, just the opening and how the energy here. It really, it is one of those times that, where we're really struggling. And I think really for the first time in my legal career, yeah, I mean, I don't know if folks know, but we had one of our staff members' moms was taken by the, basically by ICE now. And, we lots of stuff happening around trying to just, defend tenants who are immigrants. And yeah, it's a really different environment. And I think that this kind of space and people continuing to do the work and continuing to do the organizing is key. I never thought that I would say, God, I wish I was only fighting the National Association of Realtors. But that's where we're at. And it is this community. Just really want to echo what Joanna, you said at the beginning about, the only way forward is creating this community together and organizing, right? If we've learned anything from the last 200 years, it's that it works and you got to just keep coming back to it.
Thank you for your amazing sharing. You've defended tenants in eviction court, rent control ordinances like Richmond's, and helped pass just cause protections in Berkeley, which is your base. Your base is in Berkeley. So, any of y'all in Berkeley, just, you can just drop by, say hello, buy her a bagel, What's the strategy for bridging direct tenant defense with structural policy change? How do we protect new tenant laws from being gutted by courts? I can recall, I believe it was the city starts with a C, that they just passed some a really great rent. They capped. I believe it was some rent caps. It was
Concord,
Concord.
you're thinking of
Yes, yeah,
Concord.
Concord.
Yeah.
And so, and then the Empire struck back, right? And so how do we protect new tenant laws from being gutted by courts, corporate loopholes, or just weak enforcement?
Well, I think that, when you're passing tenant protections, first off, it's a lifetime job, right? It's not, well, we're just going to fix this and now it's all fine. We really have to know that it is an ongoing thing. And what happened in Concord was basic, and Salinas, that and I would say it explains we lost also protections in Marin. And the reason is not because people, stopped believing in, rent control, or that tenants aren't paying too much, or that things aren't fair, but just so much money came in from the National Association of Realtors. I mean, just unbelievable amount of money. And I think that folks weren't, I don't think that I can say somebody wasn't doing something. It's just like, it is very difficult to fight that level of money, especially in areas where it's really the first time that people have been able to move, tenant power in that way. I also think it's really important for us to remember that at least I grew up, I literally was a baby in the room when they were passing rent control in Berkeley in the 70s. And, one of the things that, when anytime, that when we either call it a backlash or, whether it was Reagan or some parts of Clinton's presidency. I mean, there are these moments where we gain, moments where we lose. And I think it's always remember when we're in these harder moments that that the people whose shoulders we're standing on also had to fight. Berkeley's took 3 times before we got the protections that we have, because it went up to the California Supreme Court and it went up to the US Supreme Court. We lost the first time it went up, even though they recognized that we have the right to have rent control. It took 3 more times to actually get it to stick. So I think I always try and remember that in these hard moments, because I had the great fortune of having basically almost 10 years of solid victories, just one after the other. And, and then finally in the last election, because of all the same reasons, right, that we lost everywhere in the country, because we haven't been, obviously this is a Democratic club, and I think it's super important that we are rebuilding in a progressive way. But, I think that even though we are not one of the blue state, one of the red states, we lost and Trump won. And the like lies and the like not really understanding and paying attention for the last 20 years or maybe 50 years to what it's like for an everyday person. And tenants are core to that. And I think that when we talk about like where do tenants fit into the conversation today, is that we know what is going on. We're rooted in what people are actually experiencing. And I think that no one better than the tenant movement to help, get us back to where we feel like we're moving forward instead of moving back. And I think the other Leah has arrived. So just want to shout out to the other half of the team.
Hi, how are you?
Hey. Yeah. Oh, we got our questions for you, girl. Yeah, you just yeah. We can't wait. And thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. Yeah, so we are unleashing the Leahs. Yes, like we are thank you all both for being here. And California cities often they get blocked by state laws when trying to pass bold progressive tenant protections, yet the state itself rarely leads in terms of the kind of stuff that we want to see from Sacramento. That surprisingly, there's been other states that have been leading in some of those tenant protections. Alameda County's eviction moratorium was a lifeline during COVID, but it expired, and state leaders stayed silent. So for Leah SW, what's the next frontier for cities like Oakland, Berkeley, Emeryville to reclaim tenant protections locally, even in the face of state level preemption or even landlord lawsuit? We're seeing a lot of them happening.
Well, I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds here, because obviously this is really like my bread and butter and what I'm doing every day. But I do think that, we really have to buckle down at the local level, because we have not been able to maintain the power that we need at the state level. And that, I kind of feel like my work is this ping pong between going to the state, like we win at the local level, and then frankly, the lobbyists go to the state level to try and contain it. And I think, folks have heard the murmurs that the apartment association is planning to put a ballot measure on that would preempt all local rent control and just cause. Now, when someone first said this to me, I was like, oh my God. And then I remembered that is what they've been doing all across the United States. And that's really the roots of Costa-Hawkins, which, Housing Act, when you're mentioning how we are constrained by the state level, You know, this happened in Florida. Florida, there are cities that passed rent control, and the state house, you know, the moneyed people went to the state house and preempted the ability to pass it. You know, the same thing happened in Missouri, where they had passed, you know, wage and hour and tenant protections, and they went to the state, the money people went to the state and did the same thing. So I think we really have to pay attention to that. And that's where I feel like, as a tenant movement statewide, I think we need to say local, and not say, because we have been, you know, it's like we go back and forth, right? We get the amazing wins in, you know, places like that have had a little bit more tenant power. And then people, you know, in Fresno and these other places that like are aware how they need it, and they think, okay, well, it's easier somehow to get at the state level because somehow it's more. I mean, I to be honest, I've never agreed with that analysis, but I think it's a really dangerous time to say we all need these same protections. Yes, but we need to do them at the local level because they need to be a little bit different. Our state is very different. So we really, I think, need to kind of hold on to that, because we don't want to be making the argument that everybody needs the same protections, because what that means is the same watered down protections that they're going to give us. So I think that the next frontier is to really be passing it in as many places as possible, and really making sure that our electeds are there to fight for us. I mean, we do not have, you know, our Democratic representative for the, you know, the northern part of our county is not a friend to tenants, and yet that is technically the most liberal or most progressive area. Like that, like we have to really think, like, how is that happening? That in this progressive place that should be most pro-tenant, it has more you know, rent control, like strong tenant protection in jurisdictions than anywhere else, I would argue, in the United States. We are represented by somebody who does not care, who literally stripped, you know, all of LA County. Every single person in LA County lost the moratorium 6 months earlier than we did up here. And she was head of the committee. Like, and I think that goes back to this focusing locally, which I'm absolutely speaking to the choir here, but I think it's so true. We have to keep fighting locally, and really start electing, you know, our people, like in terms of, like, you know, San Pablo, like uber majority tenants. Not a single person voted for rent control to be even discussed, you know, very recently. Like there is nobody in that town, something like, you know, 80% of the housing is rented. I mean, the owners, the landlords are from out of that city, right? And room packed with local people really facing personal issues and testifying, and not a single person's willing to vote for it. That's about elections, right? And they're all Democrats. So again, what you all are doing is so where we need to be.
So the Alameda County Progressive Dems, even my work with Emory Rising and Emeryville's own tenant union came out of the conversation that I had with you when I was just newly elected as a council member. And so I thought, oh, as a council member, I could just, you know, go through the system and, you know, have it go through the committees and right? And right. And so I learned that there was a lot of Groose rats organizing that needed to happen, as you're saying, local. You've represented tenants from grassroots movements like Moms for Housing, who forced the Bay Area to confront homelessness, housing theft, and corporate landlords head on. I mean, I remember when Bernie, finally said, "Oh, whoa, something's happening here." What are the risks with tenant rights campaigns?
I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh.
Excuse me. I think we discussed this, but it's almost 10 o'clock here, and I
Oh.
think that I have to go at 9:35.
Got it. Okay. All right.
You know, this is what I wanted to avoid of
No, it's okay.
embarrassing in
Cool.
front of people, but I just want you to, like, you know, respect my time and
You
understand that
know, no, I
leaving at
got you.
9:35.
So you know
So
what
that I
I'll
don't
do?
look rude for everyone. I just want to yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I got you. So Leah, can I come back to you?
Yeah,
And then okay,
of
so
course.
you're on Discos. And so all right, so Leah Goodrich. All right. Do you want me to do your intro or just go right into the questions?
Whichever.
Okay, all right. So let me go right into to your question. So, as one of the few Black women to ever serve on New York City Planning Commission, you've called out how land use and planning decisions often reinforce racial hierarchies. In the Bay Area, we see similar dynamics with equity washing in zoning debates, while Black and Brown communities face displacement. How do we shift housing policy from transactional equity checklists to actual real anti-racist tenant-centered planning at the local level?
I think one of the things that's really important is in planning for the conversations to take place at the Planning Commission itself. So one of the things that the government official who appointed me did was he created a racial equity requirement where in each proposal that comes through, the applicant, who are the developers, they have to come up with data about the demographics of the neighborhood. So that looks like what the racial demographics are, gender, and then also income, and then whether the project actually, whether they can actually afford the apartments. So it makes it part of the conversation. Um, Now I think that's just like the bare minimum, though. I think that's just like the starting point, because you can also like talk about it, but then does it actually have an impact is a second question.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So New York's landlord lobby has been ruthless in trying to roll back rent stabilization, even suing over good cause eviction protections. In California, we're actually seeing real estate PACs pour millions into feeding tenant protections, as Leah SW mentioned, under the guise of YIMBY progress. And what that means is, oh, it's making our cities more utopian. And so, what lessons can California tenant organizers learn from New York's battles against landlord influence over city and state governments, and how do we fight back? New York has, in some ways, it has been a leader in those kind of fights that we've been seeing nationally.
Yeah, I think New York is a little bit different from a lot of other places in that it is almost 70% renters. And so that makes the voter base more powerful than other places, because elected officials are aware that they can theoretically be voted out if they have proposals that piss off voters. That being said, unfortunately, one of the things that I confront in this work is there's a lot of shaming going on in terms of being a tenant. So some people that come up, I'm a tenant, and some people that come up to me, they do this whole thing of where they're like, they like, oh, I'm a tenant, I shouldn't be a tenant. And I just met someone. The thing is, I just met someone the other day, and they are a rent stabilized tenant. And then they were telling me they don't know if they don't know if they fully support Zoran's rent freeze because what about landlords? And I face this all of the time. All the time, people have this respectability politics they try to like be avant-garde. They think they're being neutral. And I think, like, to be quite frank, pre November 2024, I was very accommodating of these people. And today I'm just like, fuck you. I think, as you guys can probably tell, I'm a pretty blunt and upfront person. So I'm just like, I don't have time for this. Go and do your own work. I don't have time to sort of like intellectual laziness to like teach people and spoon feed. Like, not after I don't have time for people who vote against themselves and think it's cute or funny, or like you're trying to be neutral, or, and essentially like, you're voting against yourself and the whole community. So I do think we need to do a lot of outreach and education in terms of the socio-political aspects of tenancy, because too many people attach shame to it. I once tweeted a 93-year-old grandmother who was facing eviction in California, and people were straight up like, well, why didn't she buy a house? But this is a very common mindset, right? That among people, this is a very common, like, past a certain age, you shouldn't even be a tenant. It's almost like how people apply to the workplace. Like, oh, this workplace is sexist, they're racist, whatever. And then people be like, well, why are you still working there? Instead of saying, well, that workplace needs to change, they need to adopt policies. So I think people apply the same logic to being a tenant. So if you talk about abusive landlords, they don't go, oh, we need laws to do that. They're like, well, wait, that's their housing. Maybe you shouldn't be there. Maybe you should go buy a house go, like how people say, go start your own company if you don't want to deal with this. Well, this is how people think about tenancy. And so I think there needs to be a lot of education just on the ground to combat that.
I so I had a recent conversation with a below market renter in Emeryville who is facing mold issues, and so she had to temporarily relocate. And since we don't have any temporary relocation assistance, they're pretty much not supporting her at all. So it's all on her, even though the mold isn't her fault. One of the things that was really hard for me to say that I realized, going back to what you were saying, Leah, is it was difficult for me to say I am a below market renter too. And so, and then I realized that in my material, that even in my campaigning, I never really talked about it. I talked about being a renter. I never really talked about being a below market renter because of the, like, sometimes the shame, right? It's just like, oh, am I freeloading the system? Or am I, how's it that I'm
Yeah.
elected and at the same time, and but I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
And I was just going to add to that, like there's also the racial dynamics, because if I post a white older tenant who's in their 60s who's rent stabilized and they're an artist, the response might be like, "Oh, that's so cool, you were able to like find this spot." But if I post the same age, a Black middle-aged person who's from Harlem or older, they'll be like, "You're freeloading," right? And so I think this whole like buy a house, I think it's overall just for everyone, but I think there's a certain there is an aspect to it when it is a Black person specifically, or a person of color, where it's like you are gaming the system. Why are you still a renter in the first place? Like, why don't you just go out and buy a house, even though buying a house is almost impossible these days? So I think, there's a lot of different nuances to it.
Thank you. Last question. In your writing, you've warned against leaving tenant organizing in the hands of nonprofits, and this is a really big deal because the question of nonprofits, especially those that rely on the same government contracts or donors that uphold the status quo, that's been called into question because of the budget changes that have happened in San Francisco, and in many ways, the budget sort of pit the unions versus the nonprofits, right? And so some of the nonprofits, a lot of stories have been blown up about corruption amongst some of the nonprofits, but we all know that these nonprofits are important, like the ones that Leah Simon Weisberg runs, right? Like how do we build an independent tenant political force, one that can move beyond policy advocacy into real power building, that even includes like electoral organizing, coalition governance, and candidate accountability. Like how do we
I,
find how do we rescue the
yeah.
nonprofits in this work?
I don't think you're gonna like my answer. My answer is I actually have a little bit. I've worked in nonprofits all of my life. And there's a really great book that I recently read. It's called Diminished Democracy. And it talks about how we moved from this sort of like grassroots informal organizing on the ground, like unions, like, SNCC, like, for example, like during the civil rights era. And then we moved to these, like, to the nonprofits of where political groups, like they're relying on these like well-funded nonprofits. So now it's this sort of like professional class. And instead of it being like the on the ground stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of the nonprofit, the leadership don't look like the actual communities they're serving. Trust me, I know, because I am I am from a working class community in Brooklyn. And I mean, when I say working class, I don't even remember seeing a white person until I was 14. Okay. My neighborhood was all Black, a few Latino,
Yeah, same
and
here.
people don't understand, like New York City is like extremely, at least back then it was
Yeah.
extremely segregated. And so like, to work in nonprofits, and then you're servicing the community that you're from, and then most of the people that you're working with are not from that, forget not even from the community, they're not even from New York, and or that neighborhood. It can be a very different experience, because now you have these, this is what happened, for example, during June 2020. A lot of these same social justice nonprofits had a similar reckoning. It wasn't very different from the corporate sector.
Yes. Yes.
It
I agree.
literally, there was no like, oh, we're more enlightened. Like, it was the same fights of like, we need to change. Like, there's a lot of racism and anti-Blackness here. So I think to some degree, I think that we just genuinely need to have a conversation about the, you know, whether we are actually putting forth ideas that are germane and that are representative of the community that we're serving. Because that's been a big issue. On one quick example of this is defund the police. It's a very nuanced issue. You have, many of the intellectuals behind this movement are Black, right? But in New York City, as well as many other communities, you have many Black communities that do not want to defund the police. They're like, no, my version of equality is to have the same thing that wealthy white neighborhoods have. So I want police, I just don't want them killing me. So I don't know what you guys are talking about. You guys don't represent me. So we have this clash where you had Black elected officials who then in June 2020 were coming out and they were like, all these protests, you're from these, this is what they said, you're from these nonprofits, you don't look like my district. And so I don't trust what you're saying because my community wants police. So they literally called it political gentrification. That's what they literally framed the anti-police protests. And there's a lot of, it's very nuanced here because obviously it's not as black and white, right? But there's a grain of truth into that. Some of what is being pitched might not be representative of what the community wants. And it's way more nuanced. It's way more nuanced. So I think you just need to be cautious of that. Because when I talk to people about tenants' rights, they're doing the respectability thing. They're like, well, why don't you represent homeowners? Why don't you put all this energy into finding how? I'm like, okay, because I don't. And then we just look at each other and then that's it. So oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I have to run, but
It's okay. Yeah.
This was great. Thank you so much for
you're awesome.
Time. And I really, it's literally so late over here.
It's okay.
But I appreciate the time. Thank you so much,
appreciate
everyone.
you.
Thanks
appreciate
for coming
you.
out, Leah.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. And Leah, this is a wonderful segue back to not only that question, but even in terms of like your work for Moms for Housing, but when Moms for Housing was sort of mobilizing and organizing, especially in other conversations that we've had about astroturfing, and many of these astroturf organizations are nonprofits, and so the cities are then told, well, why should we support Moms for Housing when we already have this really nice tenant nonprofit here that says that they're doing all this really great work or whatever, but Moms for Housing wouldn't exist if these organizations were actually doing what they're doing. I'm going to just throw that at you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we're only going to see more situations where the word nonprofit doesn't have a meaning anymore, because I mean, Trump is saying now that if you're a nonprofit, you can literally, bribe elected. So I think, and as we see, to me, it's really, I mean, I think, whether it's mission driven or, I mean, I agree with everything Leah, the other fabulous Leah was saying in terms of really, that when, I agree that part of preventing people from really working, as their day job and bringing change was creating these rules around nonprofits. And that, and I think we're seeing it really right now where there are nonprofits that are really afraid. And, on the one hand, the administration is really trying to make us afraid and has power to do things that are scary, because there's only so many, civil rights attorneys to share around to really support folks. And, the entire kind of structure around nonprofits is having a board of people who in some ways are completely unaligned. And, I think that in the Bay Area, I think there have been huge efforts to try and diversify both along, race, but also economic status. But we're so far from being in a place where things aren't just still completely, disjointed in terms of who's running you know, the organizations. And it's not just about, well, you know, is there diversity amongst the folks that are working there or not, but who is deciding the power structures and what risks are going to be taken and what the environment is. And, you know, we saw many organizations unionizing, particularly just before the pandemic. And a lot of those same organizations have really shrunk. And part of that was, you know, it's really hard to go through a crisis when you barely had enough resources in the first place. And why do these nonprofits not have enough resources? Well, because they're doing government functions, right? And so, you know, when but you're doing it for half the resources, right? So you don't have good retirement, you don't have good maternity leave, all these things that we actually had been able to achieve for our, you know, government workers. But basically we've created nonprofits to do those functions, right? Like in other societies, the work I do would be part of the government in terms of legal services, you know, that we, you know, and so I do think that there is some questions around infrastructure, and I think we just have to keep pushing. I think the other thing that's been really frustrating is because of the cost of housing, you know, like there aren't a lot of people who aren't white and coming from some kind of upper middle class background going to law school and having the ability to commit to being, you know, a legal service attorney, right?
Yeah.
And then there's all these restrictions. And, you know, the organization I run, I mean, part of, you know, it's movement legal services, right? So really core to that, you got to be radical if you want to work here. But, you know, so are we going to be a target? Like, will we survive the administration and stay true to ourselves and true to that vision? It's a challenge, but I think it's one we're going to have to fight. And I mean, the one good thing about this nonprofit concept is that, you know, it's not like if we walk away, hopefully you can rebuild something else. And that's another thing that people learned both under the MacArthur era when people were being blacklisted, that as institutions are blacklisted, in some ways, that's where you want to fight. It's really hard when individuals alone are blacklisted. And I think that's another thing we really have to make sure that we are holding our community members, that we don't let, you know, Trump being like, it's that person, because that person is representing everybody else in the movement. So we also need to make sure our arms are around whoever it is they're hitting, so that there aren't any kind of, you know, the most vulnerable, and that's who they can go after for political reasons. But I think it is really tough in terms of so much of the protection and the policy infrastructure is held in a structure that is intended to not be as democratic. And, you know, but on the other hand, there are certain things you can't, you know, that it's harder to do, to hire a lawyer. You can't have a lawyer as available if you're organizing where there isn't a, you know, you don't have a staff, you don't fundraise on that level. But I think it is, you know, and I've seen the quality organizing in both, you know, spaces. Like the tenants union has been amazing and is huge, and it's been transformative in Los Angeles, and it's completely voluntary. But again, when you look at who is volunteering, it's people with resources, and they're more white. And, you know, Oakland Tenants Union, another fabulous tenant rights group that is volunteer run, but it is less diverse than, you know, Causa Justa was, and, you know, ACEs, and, you know, that are, you know, and Causa Justa completely doesn't exist anymore, which is devastating. And even though the roots of Oakland Tenants Union obviously, you know, was, you know, the people fighting for things in Oakland for tenants, you know, completely came out of the Black community. It still hasn't. So I don't, you know, I mean, I think, you know, obviously the Bay Area is, you know, we have more issues around, you know, race and diversity than I would say Los Angeles, because it's just a more diverse city. But it's huge. Anyway, I think that we still, you know, it's very much an issue. I think it's gotten worse in terms of who the leadership is. And I think a lot of it is that people have just left and gone to live in other parts of the country that are more affordable. And that has made all of the nonprofit communities much whiter. So I don't think we are we've really lost footing. So, but I think it's something, you know, we have to contend with, is and how to do it. But I think, again, the space you guys have created here is really part of creating the energy and the support. So people who, and that you're creating a learning space for all of us, I think is also really key, so that we can all, you know, kind of participate. Because, you know, like someone like me in some ways can be dangerous, like in that, like, if I'm the only person who can know the policies, like that's pretty troubling. And that's not how you want it. Like, many people need to be able to do it. And we don't really have a system that's set up that way. You know, I mean, I have several lawyers now, which is very exciting. And, you know, we do exist exactly to be able to provide that technical support for organizing, so that people don't have to fundraise for it, and that we can just be there when people ask of us to provide it. But it is important to break that barrier, that it's not only lawyers that know things. We may be the only ones who can go into court still, but policy ideas, you know, I think we try and, you know, my vision is that we're trying to be resources to like speed it up so that people can do things quickly, but not that we have the only ideas.
Thank you so much. We want to segue into a Q&A. I think we will probably have 10 minutes just to do a time check with Joanna and Vinny.
I think we've gone slightly over, so maybe let's do
okay.
5 minutes
5
for
minutes?
Q&A,
Okay.
and then yeah, if you're welcome to stay for the rest when there's more discussion, and then more things could come up.
Great.
So it looks like
I
Esther
think
has their hand. And Sarah. So Esther, go ahead. You can unmute, and then Sarah.
Yeah, hi. So I'm in Monterey County, by the way. I'm a fellow board member with Vinny on the California Democratic Renters Council.
Great.
And everything that we've discussed, I literally had this conversation earlier today, like almost verbatim, with one of the people involved with the documentary that I just put a link in the chat to. But at the end of the day, we keep talking about all of these things. And the only way that we are going to be able to get all of these things resolved and helped is if we win elections. And traditionally, nobody goes after the renter vote the way that we need to. And if we do, then we might be able to gain enough seats and address the issues that we keep throwing around and going in circles. So what I would like to hear is more conversation about how we are going to, as a party, as individuals, get the renters educated so they don't end up voting against their own best interests, and feel empowered to know that no matter how much money is poured into our elections, their votes matter. Because we might not have the money, but we have the votes in many of our jurisdictions. Many of our jurisdictions are majority renters. We've done it here in Monterey, and we've been successful at it. And I still, after almost a decade of doing this kind of advocacy, have yet to see or hear anybody talking about going after the renter vote. We keep talking about the same things over and over, but what are we going to do to get the seats back? What are we going to do to avoid losing more congressional seats to the states that Californians are leaving and going to? So I'd be interested in hearing something about that from you guys.
I think obviously that's a great discussion that you're going to have as a club. And I think one thing I just wanted to add is you know, one of the things about organizing tenants that's so great when it comes to elections is that, you know, the base information you have. I mean, one of the things that's most successful is literally door knocking and creating conversations. Obviously not just the day before the election, but that ongoing piece. And what's great is when you're organizing tenants, you literally know you're talking to a tenant because you're talking to the person at their door. And so I think that there's huge potential, but that's what it has to look like. It has to be that relationship and that actual like connection with people. And I think there's just not a lot of communities where we're doing that level of election work. You know, not only our party, but like the entire system is set up so that people who get paid for doing mailers, get paid for doing commercials, that the whole electoral process is, it's like a machine that ensures that tenants don't participate. So I feel like we talk about it as, the student vote. Like they would vote for us if they voted, but they don't, and we complain about. And when I say we, I mean everybody and nobody, but and it comes up a lot in cities. Santa Cruz talks about this, Berkeley talks about this. It's like huge percentages of a progressive vote that believe in these things, but they don't vote. They don't vote. It's kind of a, well, yeah, if the first time you've talked to them is the day before the election. So I think that, this, like, it's a lifetime project. It's not just the month before the election. It's an always, I think, is going to continue to build. And yes, learn from the communities where you are doing that. And it's working.
All right, Sarah, and then Vinny.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a Oakland renter, also a UAW member, and a bunch of our Berkeley UAW members went really hard on passing Measure BB recently, which gave tenants the right to organize into sort of like real tenant unions with the power to bargain. And I've been even more excited to hear that several buildings have organized since that. And was just curious to sort of get your take on local measures like that, that were able to pass despite tons and tons of money on the, landlord development side, and like how we build from there. And is that, the type of measure we should be looking to pass in other cities to build groundwork?
I'm a big believer in, you need to pass the law that where it's literally happening right now. That's the thing. I think that we were able to prioritize that in Berkeley. One, because we had a huge group of graduate students literally trying to organize around housing, right? And we hadn't had that in other years, that we had a union with deeply organized, deeply committed people, that this was important to them. So it was the right time to do that in Berkeley. We also updated our ordinance, which we hadn't done in a long time. And so, but I also feel like, one of the struggles is the internal, like, we, as great as we are about envisioning a better world for each other, and creating a community that is going to make a better place that we can still, thrive in. We also are really good at internal conflict and really wasting a lot of time doing other things and being, strategy is as important as creating community. And that is, and that, I guess for me, the theme is, it's like, you have to organize every day, and you have to come together. And I distinguish that, though, from anybody coming together. We just need to make friends with everybody. But I think that there's a lot of, Berkeley is sort of famous for it, of like, who is communist enough. And, I do think we have, like, learning about strategy, I think, is as important as learning about organizing. I think that, when it comes back to kind of like people being able to spend their daytime, or their work time participating in organizing. And I guess I think that's such a great thing for us to continue to discuss, because I think organizing is as important as a doctor and, and other, medical roles in our life. Like, we all need to be organized, whether it's in our workplace, that organizing is, to me, so core. And, I think we would be organizing a lot more buildings if we had people who could spend all of their work time. And the other thing is, they shouldn't be, and then when you say, okay, well, people who can do it in their spare time, again, we end up with people who have a privilege that then makes it not as an inclusive movement. So I think we really have to struggle with, how do we get to that place where we don't make the organizing not organic anymore, but at the same time making sure that people are getting compensated for the great work that they're doing, so that it can be inclusive. But I think in some ways, many of the things that we did in that ordinance in Berkeley were all just catching it up, because Oakland had really been at the forefront. Why? Because a lot of the changes we could make in Oakland, we could do through council, where in Berkeley, we had to go through the ballot, which is more expensive, it's harder. So, you know, I feel like we have to go back and forth. When you've got a strong council like we had for many years in Oakland, we were able to, I mean, within a 10-year period, Oakland went from the worst ordinance in the state to the weakest to really it's the best, right? We could do that because of the great electable folks. But now when you look back at in Berkeley, we have a very conservative council now, and we could never get the rent control that we have through Berkeley Council. I don't think we actually ever could. To this day, there's never been a council in Berkeley that would pass the ordinance we got through the ballot. So, and you know, we saw in Marin, you know, it was a real mixed bag. Like we got things through council that then got overturned because of people lying, because of so much money coming through. So, you know, we had been winning anything we took to the ballot really until last year. So lots of new realities to consider in terms of what is the best way. But, you know, again, that's why I'm like, everything should be local. What's happening locally in your community and what they need.
And Vinny, you go ahead. You can wrap us up.
Yeah, I'll be quick.
with
We
your
are running a
question.
little behind on time. And you've pretty much given a lot of things to answer. I'm just asking, as a group, you know, what can we do to really, you know, help out with tenant? Because, you know, I'd love to see our organization become more active and taking action, and not just, you know, we send good emails, we have good meetings, but I'd really like to know what we can do to take action. So.
Well, I do think making sure that, you know, we've got tenant-centered electeds running. You know, and I think as Democratic clubs, that's really important. And I mean, yeah, I think tenant-centered. People need to be running, and I'm just shocked and frustrated at how we don't have that. We don't even have people thinking about it in the future. We don't have people, and you know, even folks like, you know, not to totally speak for everybody, but like, I'm shocked at how often good progressive people want to run, and, you know, that are leftist and like working family focused. And people still ask them, well, who else is running? Is the incumbent gonna run again? I'm like, why would we not be running against these terrible incumbents? And I think that we need to be much more like, it's okay to run and not win, and come back and win again. They've been doing that, right? Like they've been trying to get rid of, you know, they've been trying to get rid of Roe v. Wade for 50 years, right? And they kept trying and trying and trying. We need to be doing the same thing for our side, or not our side, but like for the community, you know, that we're in. So,
Yeah. All right, we have time for one more question. Why don't we go with Paula? Go ahead. Because we are, like I say, we are running a little behind, but let's take in one more question.
Yeah, the question I have has to do with what can we do to goose the Democratic Party to provide all of our clubs the data that we need. They have it in PDI, their contracted data, you know, database to tell us where our renters are in our jurisdictions. I do that somewhat locally for different organizations and different candidates, and it's really hard. It's really hard to get that data. And it's especially hard to go door to door if you don't know what doors to knock on. And I mean, obviously apartment buildings are apartment buildings, but there's a lot of single family home residences where we live. We're almost 61% renters in the city of Marina, and yet we don't have a list. And so the Democratic Party could do that for all of us. And I think that would really help people in organizing and being able to go door to door. They know which doors to knock on and who is a registered voter and who is not a registered voter. That's really important because it helps us do registration drive, not just for the party, but for the cause of tenants and rent stabilization. Thank you.
I mean, I think you know, important question. Obviously, I'm not the right person to answer that question. I would say though, unlike when you're trying to get out the vote on different issues, I think actually with tenants, because because obviously they're connected to the building they're living in. And that's the issue you're trying to organize around, that you can just door knock a neighborhood. And I do think that that's almost more important. I think one of the things that's hard is that you can't get into some buildings to door knock, and that's different depending on where you are in California, or even within Alameda County, whether you're door knocking the buildings that have more garden style and some of the more historically suburban areas, which make it easier to access folks. But I really think that in contrast to like healthcare or minimum wage, you can just door knock a neighborhood. And remember, people who own homes are more like tenants than landlords, right? They're paying a monthly fee so they can stay in their house. They don't own it, for 30 years. And every month they could risk eviction. So they should be our allies. And what the apartment association has been very effective at doing is they have turned every single homeowner
Totally
into
agree.
a property owner
Yes.
instead of a homeowner and a potential ADU landlord or a duplex landlord or a room landlord. And so I think we need to flip it. And the reason we've been as successful in places like Berkeley is because homeowners were able to remember that they had been tenants and that their mortgage is as much. Like the foreclosure crisis should have led to incredible radical change. And instead it really separated us more. So I think we really got to push back on that, because I think that's going to really be a problem going forward. And we across the board lost, with every time we've tried to change the Costa-Hawkins law, single family homes see it as a threat. And in fact, Concord, one of the reasons we've lost so much in Concord is that the apartment association used the PDI, sent out texts to Republicans who they assume voted for Trump, and said, your house is going to be under rent control, and you're going to have to pay a fee, whether you rent it out or not, which is totally not true, but you're allowed to lie. And the only way to combat that is that one-on-one information.
Anyway, well, Leah, I want to thank you so much for coming here tonight, and Kalima, great job. And I will just say real quickly, Paula, I actually ran against a slumlord and had to do a lot of the analysis of who was a renter and who was not, because obviously I wanted to point out I'm running against a major landlord. So anyway, that is definitely a very important topic, and I would love to get that data. And not, and the party should be providing that. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna, who's going to lead our next section. So go ahead, Joanna. And again, thank you so much, Leah, for coming out. Very informative. So.
Amazing. I learned so much. And thank you, Kalima, for bringing the two Leahs for us tonight. I still really think we should have some time for discussion, because it's very helpful to reflect and apply what we've learned. So we adjusted the agenda a little bit. We still have about 13 to 15 minutes that we can have in breakout rooms. And as usual, we're going to do those kind of automatically. So whichever breakout room you end up in, you feel free to stay. If you don't like it, feel free to leave. If you really don't want to be in the breakout room and chat with others, you can stay in the main room. That's okay. I know some of you are multitasking and taking care of family. And the topic for our conversation really is, how do we bring this home, right? What can we do better to protect and expand tenant rights here in the Bay Area? We can talk about local, city council work, local ballot measures, and also, if you're interested in state legislation, there's lots of state legislation. We're lucky tonight, we have members of the Renters Council, which is a charter club of the statewide California Democratic Party. So they may have ideas about that as well. So I apologize. I was vigorously taking notes and preparing a Canva for us. So I haven't done the breakout room. So just give me like 30 seconds and I'll break those out for us. And then after we're done with this section, we're going to have just maybe 5 minutes for y'all to fill out a quick survey and let us know what you want us to focus on, and then we'll wrap. We should be done by 7:30. let's see, there's 21 of us. So let's do 5 breakout rooms. So you all right, welcome back, friends. I hope that those conversations were helpful. Sarah is smiling, so that's a good sign. And normally we take a few minutes to kind of share any important takeaways from the breakout rooms, and I add them to our little Canva board. This time around, we are running low on time, but I did start a Canva board for us. You can see it here. I wrote some of the things that our two brilliant Leah said. And so I'll put this in the chat for any of you who you may want to add anything to the board. You're very welcome. And I will take maybe 1 or 2 folks if you want to share anything that really came up as important that you were like, you know what, I want more people to know that this is happening. We'll go with Shran first.
So in our small breakout room, we heard from someone who is facing enormous problem with mold in her building. And she's tried various things, but nothing has yet been resolved at all. And her landlord is trying to intimidate her from speaking to other people in the building who have already told her that they know that there's mold in their apartments, or they're affected by it too. And she now faces having to find an attorney, but is having a hard time with that. So I think we ought to there's a number of things. It might be legislation that's needed in Emeryville about that. I don't know. I'm not from Emeryville, and there might be just general support from a club like this for a group of people that she represents.
That's very helpful. Thank you for sharing, Shran. Leah, do you have any immediate legal legal aid resources we can share with folks?
Well, I mean, East Bay Community Law Center is the organization that actually has some funding from the city to provide services. So for Emeryville, I always recommend that as the first place. There are 2 firms that will do kind of one, building at a time. One is the Andrew Wolf's firm, so I would recommend calling them about doing mold. They do those cases a lot. But obviously, suing your landlord, there's an important role in that. And actually, we actually have great laws. And I think for good or for bad, we also have more of a tenant bar than really anywhere else in the state. When it comes to organizing within your building, if I'm not sure if this person is the person that Kalima, you were mentioning about, if you're living, you have lots of protections if you're in these below market properties. They're better, highly regulated. But yeah, it's if this is where organizing is important, and this is where, whether it's as a tenant union, Emeryville wide, going together to do it. It is hard to on your own organize your own building. Some people really are able to do it. But I know, like, the first time I organized where I lived was in San Francisco, and I called the Housing Rights Committee. And even though I was, a confident person and blah, 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 like, I didn't like having that connection with another group to help organize us. So like I organized a meeting of the tenants in the building, and one of the organizers came as like the speaker to give us a know your rights. So I think in that way, tenant organizers can provide that support. And it is easier. It's hard to just like do it on your own. That's, it is helpful even from the beginning, especially when you're going through something at the time. And I think that's also kind of what's unique about tenant organizing, is often people become aware of the movement because of what they're going through. But that also can make it harder to be organizing around yourself. I think Kalima has his hand up.
Yeah, we'll go with Kalima. And I saw Anne's question in the chat, Kalima. I don't know if you know if Emeryville has tenants union.
Yeah, so Emery Rising is a tenant union.
Okay.
And so we're a neighborhood group, but we're organized under the principle of a tenant union. And so I founded Emeryville's first tenant union through the Courtyards, 65th tenant union. And the way that the Emery Rising is organized is that you have to have a group, and it's not individual membership, you have to have a sort of group membership. And so we just admitted one tenant group that is facing lead poisoning, unfortunately, by one of our biggest developers in Emeryville. So currently, in terms of legislation, and I have to remind people in terms of the politics in Emeryville, is that I am the only pro-tenant council member in Emeryville, and so I have been pushing for temporary relocation assistance. So that's something that Emeryville does not have that other cities have. So that, for example, many of the issues that that are my constituent is facing is because we don't have temporary relocation assistance. So it's either you're a tenant, or or it's a just cause eviction, and there's a big gap. And so having that temporary relocation assistance, so that's currently going through the housing committee. The other is the tenant right to organize. We do not have a tenant right to organize in Emeryville, and so that is currently going through our tenant our housing committee, and then we have that so Leah is right. So when it comes to, I remember when Leah said that Emeryville had the worst tenant protections in Alameda County, and I went into the weeds as to how and why has that happened. So what happens is that Emeryville has mostly around the state level of tenant protections for everyone else but below market renters. Below market renters have never and don't have any tenant protections. We have some just cause stuff, but most of the below market affordable housing, anyone who fits into that bracket, the state gave that power to the cities to figure that out. I saw the agenda of the minutes and they said, okay, we're going to provide some tenant protections for Emeryville residents, and then they said we're going to do it just for the non-affordable housing, non-BMR residents, right? And then the next one we're going to focus on the BMR affordable housing. They did one and they didn't do the other. And so, and that's been, I think, since 2017. So we don't have any tenant protections. We don't even qualify for the state tenant protections, and so we don't even so a BMR tenant can get a 25% rent hike in Emeryville. And so just to wrap it up, I actually called a couple of friends of mine, and one of my the constituent that in question, she needs some furniture to be moved. And so we're all going to get together and do that. And a couple of other tenants around Emeryville are also going to be helping me help her in that sense. And we're going to record it, and we're going to show, hey, this is what tenant power looks like. But why is it that we're doing this when some of these things could be handled legislative wise in Emeryville? And so that's what's happening. So in answer to the question, yes, we do have a tenant union in Emeryville. We're still very new, but most of the activities that we've had to be stealth, because most of the tenants came to me and they said, we're worried about retaliation, not just from the landlords, but from members of City Hall, from City Council. City Council have actually retaliated against people who have spoken out about their tenant rights. And so so as soon as we get a tenant right to organize, then Emery Rising will be a little bit more visible. The members will be a little bit more visible, but that work is happening, and I'm doing my best as a council member to show up for my constituents. Yeah, so hopefully that answers this question.
Thank you, Kalima, for this important work. God knows it's not easy, and I know you're fighting on many different levels. We are about to wrap. I just want to acknowledge Leon's question in the chat if there's a way for Democrats to create better media around renter protections. Leon, that's a really important point, and I think we need you to help create better media. And maybe one of the future topics for our sessions can be around media. How do we actually engage media and get more of our good stories out there? Speaking of topics for next sessions, we wanted to share with you a quick Google form. I'm going to put it in the chat. Please go ahead and open it now, save it onto your computer or to your phone so you can fill it out. It should take you literally like 2 minutes. This is just to let us know what kind of speakers you want to hear from, what kinds of organizing you might be interested in. Do you want to join the board, the leadership council? There's a lot we're trying to build, so please take a moment to fill that out. And then the last things I'll say is that we're joining the Wellstone and many other amazing democratic clubs in person, real life picnic at Bushrod Park on July 27th from 12 to 3 p.m. So please come there. We'll have some delicious food. You're welcome to bring a dish if you can, and if not, that's okay. I think the rest of us have to pull together to feed everybody who's coming. It'll give us a chance to continue those conversations in person. And just a reminder, our meetings are the third Sunday of the month. So our next meeting is August 17th, again, 6 to 7:30 p.m. And we hope to see you there. Thank you all so much. Bye, everyone. Bye, Sarah. Bye, Ray. Bye, Ann. See you soon. Bye, Sharon. Thanks for the question and the comments.
Bye, thank you.
Take
Bye,
care.
Maya.
everybody.